Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm going to be doing a model of a Dinky 24X Ford Vedette. From the French name you can guess that this is a French Dinky toy, but it is a Ford. So this one is in pretty good condition. It's been taken apart and repainted, and somebody's cut off or filed off the very top of those posts. So I don't have to grind this one to take it apart, but I will have to drill out those posts for screws. The casting looks in really good shape. It's been painted blue. It turns out that that blue is actually a color that came with originally. Now the wheels and the base may not match the toy because there's a couple of other Vedettes in the lot that I purchased. So this one had red wheels, which look great, but they wouldn't have been on a blue model. Of course, that could have been a different color model originally. So I'm not saving the axle, so I'm just cutting it off. That's the easy way. And take those tires off. This one's interesting. The axle is kind of stuck. It's been maybe painted in, or I don't know. So it's not coming out, so I've got a block with a little hole. That didn't work. I've got to push it further with a punch. So got that one off. So the other one probably doesn't match this model, but it's an axle that fits pretty well, so it may be for one of the Ford Vedettes. So I just filed off the mushroom on the end and took that so I have a sample of the correct length of axle. So here I'm on the drill press. I'm drilling out those posts. The mushrooming portion of the post has been filed off, so it's pretty straightforward to drill a hole into these posts. And you can see actually when I'm going in, it's interesting because you can see I go in fairly deep and then all of a sudden it gives way right at the end and I stop drilling. So there's an air pocket at the bottom of the post on both of those posts, which is interesting. It's got something to do with the way the casting works, but it also tells you that it's those posts are not necessarily as strong as they look because they probably, many of them have cavities, air pockets inside the casting. I've not had any break, but I have had some that had actually a hole in the side of the post. So as usual, I'm using this 440 tap that has a spiral flute so that the swarf comes out of the hole instead of being pushed down in it. And then I'm putting a couple of screws to cover those holes when it goes through the paint stripping and painting process. So speaking of paint stripping, it goes into my paint stripping box, all the painted parts, and I go outside. I use boiling water, just boiled in the kettle, and then caustic soda. Maybe not enough, put a bit more. There you can see the blue came off of the paint off the model. So the base didn't really strip everything off very well, and that's because I think the paint or bluing is right in with rust. This was a fairly rusty base. So I'm going to put it into the rust stripper and leave it overnight. The rust stripper is a slow process, but it will take off every bit of rust and leave all of the good metal behind. Now these the wheels, a couple of them are rusty. So of course that tells me that they're steel, so they may be machined wheels, which is not usually the case with the British-made Dinky toys. So now the casting has kind of a rough powdery finish on the metal. So I take that off with the wire brush. That's kind of the quickened version. But I got most everything off, but then I realized that there's the mold lines and the casting process where the mold comes together, and these ones are quite prominent right on the hood or on the bonnet. And then on the back, on the rear quarters, there's also the casting lines. So I go to some trouble and file those off and then sand them smooth. So on the front you can see it looks better, and on the back as well. So the file is a little bit coarse, so I go on with some 400 wet dry sandpaper and clean it up. Now there's some areas where there's parts where there's some vacancy of material. So I put this spot and glaze putty and sand it out nice and smooth. So now it's next day, and I can take the base out of the rust stripper and take out the wheels, and I put in the axle, I believe, even though I'm not going to use it. So the base is not bad. It's been bent, and it's kind of tricky getting, because the bend is kind of in the middle. So these pliers, they can get me these small things to make it flat, but the middle part you don't really reach with those pliers. So basically I have to bend it with my fingers. So I'm test fitting it into the casting to see if it's straight the way it should be, because it has a weird step going to the rear axle. So I want to make sure that it's going to sit properly. So I don't know exactly what the shape should be, but I can tell when I put it into the casting. So now I can go and straighten it out further by hammering on the vise. This is a surprisingly effective method to flatten a piece of sheet metal. And you tap it a bunch of times, and it actually will take the flat shape of your anvil, which in this case is the vise jaws. That vise is a 4-inch vise, and I've added an inch on each end, so now it has 6-inch jaws that kind of stick out. It's good for some things, too flexible if you're trying to grip something that really needs a lot of strength, but for model making it works well. Now look at this. You can see the rust pitting on that base. So it was very rusty at some point. It had been painted over, so you couldn't tell how rusty it was. It was just black. The rust was painted black. Now, time to take it into the spray booth and paint the satin black paint onto the base. I'm not making any effort to fill that rust pitting, because that would be ridiculous to try and make that smooth and leave the letters in place properly. So here are the hubs. I'm spraying some primer on them. Now the paint I'm still using some of the old Mr. Hobby aqueous paints. They're very good paints, but they're somehow toxic, so I don't know if I should really be using them. But I have a few bottles, and they're good paints, so I'm going to continue to use them until they're done, and then I will move on to other paint. So I'm putting in the leveling thinner, the Mr. Hobby leveling thinner. That slows down the drying of the paint, so that the surface will become more shiny. And now it goes into my airbrush, which is still giving me trouble because it's plugged, but it's working well enough to get paint onto this model anyway. It's actually it's making funny noises. There's some stuff stuck in there. But actually in the process, not of painting these wheels, I painted them first to see how the brush is working. And it's suitable enough that I can go ahead and work on the body. But it is making a funny noise, and what I believe it is, the noise it was making is there's some little bits of debris that are somewhere in the system that can't be cleaned out. They would have to come out just with the solvent going through. And at the end of this paint job, a bunch of little chunks came out and embedded themselves into the paint. So I wound up having to go back in. I sanded off the chunks and I put another coat of paint on it, which I don't show doing, but I actually had to do. And then since then the airbrush has been working much better. Now this is a interior that I 3D printed. That was quite a long design process because I've designed slots for putting windows into the car. And here I've put the steering wheel, I've cast it right in because I don't like trying to take the little steering wheel and push it into the little hole and glue it in place. It's too much trouble. So I'm able to print it straight into the model and then just paint it so it looks like a separate piece. So now I need to do some taping because I'm going to be painting the bumpers, and I'm using the paint that's a metallic silver paint that really looks a lot like the original Dinky paint when you see it on the new models. So I have to do it so that it looks like the Dinky things that should be sprayed on. In this model, it has a simple enough grill that I can tape around it. And for the headlights, of course, I need to punch holes in the tape and put those bits there. And for the back, there's a funny little thing sticking up above what looks like a number plate pad. So once I've taped up those parts, then I want to cover up the rest of the model so overspray doesn't go and spoil the finish elsewhere on the model. So I put these big honkin' big pieces of tape with a paper towel attached, and then I can go in and I can spray with this Rust-Oleum metallic spray, which works really well. And I put it on my little turntable and put a few coats on there. It needs to be thick enough so that it becomes very, very smooth. And this process has been working for me very, very well. Of course, I still have to do all that taping each time, but I think it's worth it. So of course the taking off is very important. I need to be very careful. But this paint really dries quickly. I do this within 10 minutes so the paint hasn't completely cured, because then when you pull the tape off, it can pull the paint right off as well. And I show you a speeded up version of removing the tape, but you get to see all the tape bits removed without the time in between as I'm trying to get the piece of tape off of the tweezers. And it came out absolutely fantastic. Very, very pleased with it. Now, I've got my last white tires that I ordered from Steve Flowers at Model Supply. The link is below. They don't pay me anything, but you know what? You gotta support them because they provide many of the parts that I can't get anywhere else. And particularly these white tires, because they're hard to get at all. And Model Supply has the cheapest ones. And this is my last set, so I'm kind of, oh, what do I do now? Anyway, I do have an option to buy some 3D printing material that's like white rubber, but it's quite expensive. Probably cheaper for me to go to Model Supply and buy a bunch of tires. So here I'm preparing an axle. Obviously it's going to be 2 axles, but these models, turns out, usually have 2 axles that are exactly the same length. So once I figure out the length for one of them, in this case the back, where it's clear what the length should be, so I can measure it on there, and then I cut it in this block. It's a collet block that has a 5C 5/8 collet, but I have an adapter in there to bring it down to 2 millimeters, because it's difficult for me to find even a 2 millimeter collet, and it would be very expensive, so this is much cheaper for me to just print out and use a collet that I already have. So once I get that off, I file the end square and clean off the burrs, because otherwise it's not even going to go through the hubs. And then I'll use that length, and I'll measure another axle based on the same length. So let's see how it looks in here. Okay, that looks like a pretty good length. Then I've got a little bit more material on this rod. These are longer rods. I forget how long they are when they start. But anyway, this is the end of this. It's not rod, it's tubing. And the difference between pipe and tubing is pipe, the measurement is for the inside diameter, whereas tubing, the measurement is the outside diameter. So this is tubing because it's measured by the 2 millimeter outside diameter. Now for the ends of the axles, I've got my mushrooms. So I pull those out, and I've got this nice medicine bottle with a captive cap, so I can't lose the cap, which I would certainly do if I used a medicine bottle that had a loose cap. And I put it into this little pin vise, and I polish the end. The problem with these is these little nails are coated with a coating that makes them look bronze, but it comes off in a couple of seconds. Now here you can see there's the base is rusted right through. You can see light coming through, but it's kind of a historic memento that this thing was really in a very sad state at one point, and it had already been restored somewhat when I got it, because that rust had been painted completely black. So there I'm using 5-minute epoxy, and I put my little polished nail in there, and that's my mushroom. They look absolutely perfect. They look exactly like a normal Dinky toy mushroomed axle end. So I'm really pleased with this process. I don't have to put the finished model into a drill press with a nail set spinning on top of it furiously as I put high pressure onto it. This is a much less stressful process. So this is the other axle. This one is assembled before the toy is assembled. Now I'm doing these at the same time, and you can see the 5-minute epoxy has started to harden. It's about 2.5 minutes in, and it's still good enough that it moves so that I can get that last nail glued in. So this is going to have windows, and this is a new process that I thought about and said, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do next time. And so to make the windows, the slots are already in, you can see in the door. And so first I make a little tongue that sticks down and goes into the slot. And those slots each have a big hole in them. And that's because when the 3D printing process, the printing resin has to be able to get out of the slot, and it's not going to come out completely from the slot unless there's a big hole there, so that there's really just a sort of framework that holds the plastic window in. But I've got slots here by the back doors, so I have back windows. You can see I'm fitting it here, so it's still too tall. It's sticking in there, so I'm going to have to cut off a little bit off the top. And I've got tape on those, and here's the front. I've got the tape on there so it protects, because I've got my fingers all over them. So the first thing I do is I put tape to protect the plastic. And so that way I can cut it to size, I can fit it over and over and press it with my fingers and everything, and it doesn't, it's not going to leave any fingerprints, because then I'm going to peel off the protective tape at the end, and they will be just fine. So there I have all the windows set up, including the back window. And you can see I have that whole tail sticking down there. And then, of course, the last step before assembly is to take the protective tape off of here. And it's a bit of a trick to do it. And then I'm careful not to get my fingers onto my nice clean plastic surfaces. And all the previous ones I've done, those windows always got smudged or even scratched. And on this one, for the first time, see I'm holding by the edges, there's no fingerprints at all on any of these bits of plastic. Of course, if you get them so clean like this, there is a drawback, and that is the windows become almost invisible. You have to look at them just when there's a reflection that lets you see that there's actually a window in there. And you'll see that at the end. So anyway, this worked out extremely well. I'm very pleased with the process and the result. And I'm not very good at holding the thing in the camera. So there you can see in the corner I'm grabbing one of the stainless steel button head cap screws. And I know other people glue rivets in there, and the problem is I kind of like to have this, because if I see some problem after putting it together, which often happens, I can always take the base off again and work on it and then still put it back together. So I did all that assembly, and I realized that I hadn't painted the tail lights onto the model. So there's my opportunity. I'm using this tool. This is a tool that that the ladies use to paint dots onto fingernails at the salon. It's a dot painter basically, and it's brilliant. It's just a little ball, and you dip it in the paint, and it's perfect for painting things like these tail lights. So here's what we started out with. It's blue. I didn't change the color. It's actually a color that was an original color, and here's what it looks like now. I saw the pictures of the original color, this blue and the white tires, and I said, this is really pretty model, and I want to do it this way. So it winds up being the same color that I got it in, and maybe it was the same color it came, for all we know. Anyway, it's a beautiful thing, and you can see now, you can see the back window there because of reflection, but the side windows, you can't see them. You don't know that they're even there. There's no fingerprints on them. There's no scratches on them. Same with the windshield. I think the windshield, there's a little reflection there. You have to see a little bit of reflection so you know it's there. So I'm really pleased with this model. It came out very attractive. So I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I enjoyed making this toy. If you're enjoying my videos and you want to help out, you know that you've heard from me before that I'm not able to get anything monetized right now from YouTube, so I figured out a way you could help out, and that is I've got a Buy Me a Coffee set up. in the text below. So yeah, once in a while, if you're enjoying the show, then I wouldn't mind if somebody would once in a while send me a coffee. So until next time, be seeing you.